I'm Howard Feldman, and this is an episode of Synthesis TV.
This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
Absolutely delighted to welcome you in, because we've been sitting and having conversations that are very, very interesting. I kept thinking we need to just open this up and have you join us. I'm Howard Feldman. We're joined by Chris Erasmus, who heads up AWS in South Africa, and as well as Paul Spagnoletti, who heads up the Synthesis Cloud team here. And it's actually quite incredible. I was telling Paul a little bit earlier, I came across this article in the New York Post that I actually thought was so funny, and it said a popular AI chatbot has been caught lying on robocalls, telling users that it's human. And I thought, like, it's such a cool article, but it's actually so frightening because we're living in a world of wonder. Everything is changing so quickly. We don't know what is real, what is not real. Businesses are stepping back and saying, hold on a second. There is so much possibility out there for me, but where do I go? What do I do? And it's fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting that you sort of start off with that piece. I mean, quite often when we talk about the space, we think about the ability for hallucinations to occur, right? And it almost feels like off the back of the data and getting some level of confusion into the mix, there's an hallucination that happens there. Yeah. And where that takes that specific chatbot or the user, no one knows, right? Neither do we. It's going to be quite interesting to see where we are in 6 or 12 months' time. Yeah.
But as head of AWS, I mean, you're looking at this enormous area of expertise and information, developments happening all the time. You doing more and more in South Africa. It's really that from an image point of view, the way I kind of picture it is there's this huge wave, and that you're standing on this wave that's coming to shore. But do you know where it's going to, how deep and far this wave is going to go?
I mean, we have the feeling that it is probably the most disruptive, biggest opportunity of certainly our generation. If you look at some of the sort of previous revolutions, it's in line with that. I mean, we also believe that AI ML has been around for a really long time. If you think about Amazon, probably 25 years, sure. We've been implementing it or using it in our storefronts, whatever it might be. But I think the big thing for us now is it's actually in the hands of the consumer. And the minute it hits the hands of the consumer, there's a massive step change, right?
Okay.
And that is what we see is to say that in the last couple of years, we're almost consuming content. We're consuming something that has computer vision or has AI ML ingrained in it, but you don't know that, you don't feel that experience. If we think about what we're doing with Formula One, there are a lot of good examples there. But the minute you put in the hands of the consumer who doesn't have to think about too much, that's when there's this big sort of step change, which we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months.
So it's incredible that the change, and it really is almost speeding up, isn't it? Yeah. What do you see as, from an AWS perspective, what do you see as the biggest factor in your world to that is going to contribute to change and to business efficiency?
Yeah. So again, I mean, if I think about this big wave around generative AI, which everyone is speaking about, I mean, I can't get into discussion with any customer or any stakeholder, either my friends, without generative AI or AI coming up, because again, now everyone is talking about it. For me, the biggest part of that, though, is taking the step back and actually thinking about the data and our customers' data strategy and having that house in order to take real advantage of it. So if you ask me what's going to be the biggest contributor, it's organizations taking the step back, understanding what their data strategy really looks like and using that to drive the step change that we talk about. I think without them getting that right, no one knows. Again, I think about Formula One. If you look at all the work that we're doing with Formula One globally, I'm a big racing fan. It started with Formula One wanting to understand the data and the different points in terms of the sensors across the cars, the tracks, etc. And now if you look at the fan engagement and some of the content that is created through the broadcasters, very different experience to what anyone thought would be possible. But it started with something quite fundamental, right? And I think that's going to be the biggest contributor, Paul.
And it's so interesting because there's this massive growth in interest in Formula One. And I wonder if it didn't come from that. I wonder if it didn't come from people, instead of just watching these cars going around, they suddenly had access to data, information. They could start to understand the nuances in maybe in a different way. And then it becomes much more engaging.
I think there are a couple of things with that. So, I mean, there's the one that is, I guess, less apparent. But if you think about the current regulations that the new cars were brought out in 2022, we're in sort of year three of that cycle. The aim was to bring racing closer together and to make it more interesting. Right. Ironically, we went through a year and a half where the opposite was true because Red Bull had really found their straps. But you look at this year, this past race that happened on the weekend in Austria, the gap between the individual that was first versus the individual that finished 15th, so made Q2 out of Q1, was less than 0.8 of a second. It's the smallest gap we've ever seen in history, right? So you look at it that way. Now, years ago, it was a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Now it's that tight just to get into the second qualifying. That's less apparent to fans. I think the thing for me, though, is the insights that you see outside of that. So in the Spanish Grand Prix, I actually saw Lewis Hamilton was essentially hunting Charles Leclerc down. And there was an insight that popped up around the attack path or the time to attack. I don't know if you've seen that insight, but it called out within 4 laps he'd be within range to make a lunge on Charles. And 4 laps later, I had a look, and there he was in DRS.
So that could predict. It could predict that was going to happen.
Now, if you're a fan, you go, okay, so this isn't. I now know what to expect. You almost sit there waiting to see how accurate it is or whether he lives up to the expectation. Right?
And racing lines, right? I also saw a stat around the racing line about it's fractions of a second quicker, but based on a racing line, how quick it was. And the gap was determined by the racing line. And literally that was a couple of seconds, which is phenomenal. It's also becoming very immersive, right? And I think this is
so that's also
point,
part
right?
of it,
like even if you take something like, and it's tech and it's people, right? And I think that's the interesting thing, particularly with the AI kind of story, right? If you take something like Drive to Survive, it's brought the fan into the homes and lives of the driver and the teams and the principals. Before, the principals were on the side, nobody really cared too much about them. Now everybody knows, who Horner is, who Toto is, etc., because you're part of that. Then you've got the data coming through to support some of this stuff. So suddenly you are intimately involved, right? And it was fascinating. I was listening to a talk the one day from a global speaker in South Africa, and he was saying that this generation, many of us think about this generation as being one of the kind of evolutions of humanity from a technology perspective, and we think that the internet was the big thing, and it's not. It's going to be AI, and it's going to be the way we handle AI that is what we're going to be known for as in generations to come. And yes, without the internet and without cloud, it wouldn't have put things like AI into the palm of our hands because we didn't have the access to data, speed to data, computability, etc., to do that. So they are all very big pieces of this incredible puzzle. But we're playing with a very interesting space
because it's all about. I mean, it's such a great metaphor this because it's imagine in your business if you could predict what was going to happen in 4 laps. And we saw this is interesting during COVID as well. I would speak to a lot of the experts, and they were managing people at home. And because they were collating all of this data, they would collect people's stats every day. This one organization that I was dealing with. So they would find out what everybody's stats were. And somebody might have been feeling absolutely fine. But they could predict based on their stats that within a day they were going to land up in a serious situation. So a day before that, they could get them into a hospital, start giving them preventative treatment, and not allow them to get as ill. And they wouldn't have known it. They didn't know about their own bodies. But because of data and because of information, they could predict what was likely to happen to them. And it's just an incredible thing. And this Formula One thing is so brilliant because if businesses were to look at that and say, right, And I think it was so poignant what you said earlier is they almost don't know where to start. They know they have to have this conversation, but what do they do with this conversation?
And to your point, Howard, what I loved about that story as well was like it started with the basic stuff or the critical components to the business in that case is the components, the actual car, etc., etc. It then evolved to being more immersive with the fan and bringing out data, etc., etc. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the passion around the tech that we go for the big shiny
that's always
object,
my thing. Yeah,
right? And we talk about the
100%.
sexy stuff when actually I've seen some of the stuff that AWS have done, within Amazon itself, right? Yeah. Like just within the production side of things, and you look at some of the things around supply chain and all these kind of things that they've done, like that's not the flashy little shiny thing, but the value to business is so profound. But it's almost hidden. It's like almost nobody really talks about that, but they'll talk about what are we going to do from an AR bot perspective. It's quite interesting.
I've seen it. I sat with one of the big banks board. I was lucky enough to spend some time with them a couple of weeks ago. And in the conversation, we were actually sort of enabling and talking about generative AI. But when you have those individuals around the room, you have so many different areas of focus and interest, and then also the level of depth is quite interesting. And you straight away go into how do we leverage this to leapfrog, and we can't afford not to be part of this almost race, right? And then as you start to unpack that, you eventually get them to understand, well, there are all these fundamentals, almost brass tacks, that you haven't thought about. And for me, what is like the penny drop moment was the CEO said, so you're telling me we have the following 5 steps that we need to think about before we can even talk about generative AI? Absolutely. You can do some really rudimentary basic stuff, build a really cool conversational chatbot, return some results, that type of stuff. But if you really want to make a meaningful impact for your business as well as your customer, you have to get the basics right. And I think it's like anything in life. In sports, top sports teams get the fundamentals right to drive the outcome. They don't just rock up and win the World Cup. And that's quite often what we have to help organizations think about, right?
So what would, it's obviously different in every business. So there's no rule. But if we had to list some of those things that companies should look at, what are they?
Paul, do you have a
Let's start with you, Paul.
I'm happy to give that, but I don't want to take away from.
Yeah, look, I think it's to your point, Chris. I think one of the key things is understanding that underlying data fabric, right? Like where does our data reside? What is it? How do we leverage this kind of data? I think that's super important. I think what I love
so it's accuracy of data.
Yep. Well, it's about
understanding
where it is first and
exactly
what
where it is, that there's integrity.
Yeah.
That you can access it.
Yeah.
All that's
and harnessing it, right? But I also loved your example now around the banking example, right? I think to my point around the flashy kind of object, right? We're always going for the end result. And what I've always loved about working with AWS particularly is that they are very thorough around how they do how that engagement happens. There are steps that you take to get to the outcome. You don't wake up and start sprinting as a baby. You first crawl and then you walk and then so you go on. And I think it's really taking organizations back to understanding, what's the route, where's the end state, and how do we get there in a very measured way. With good thought process along that, right? And I think every organization is different, but I think there's some wonderful opportunities that don't always have to be the one that's sitting out in the front of your web page, as an example, right? Or in the face of the customer. Some of the stuff is really just around process enhancements.
And your own teams. Your own teams.
Some of your own teams. I had a conversation earlier this morning around data and utilizing data to give us better insights so we may make better informed decisions because we've got the data to do that. We've got the data, but sometimes we don't harness it correctly and bring it into the right spaces to actually leverage it correctly. And that was this morning.
Yeah, and again, how you can supplement what these really smart teams are doing already. So if you think about the ability to check code, improve code, help write code as an example.
Yeah.
That's all really great if you want to think about process enhancements and increased productivity. The other piece I'd add to you, though, is around security, right? So if you think about this proliferation of data, data anywhere, one of the biggest things for us, we always talk about security being job zero, is being able to work with organizations, they almost in the moment go, well, we want to release something really cool for our customers, not thinking about where the data sits, how secure it is, what your actual charter is around that. And then, again, whether you're using the most appropriate tools to deliver on the outcome for the customer as well. So we spend a lot of time almost putting people back and saying, is this purpose-built for what you're trying to do versus something that is just out for the consumer, right? And I think that's some of the basics. The data, where is it? Secondly, is it secure? Do you understand what's required? And then looking at what the outcome could really be, right? The other bit is, really fundamental to that, like, have you moved to the cloud? Because if you're not in the cloud, like, it's really expensive to try and go out and buy this infrastructure to test something.
Absolutely.
So those are sort of some of the...
Are those conversations that we're still having? Should we be moving to cloud?
I don't think it's should we be. I think it's how.
Okay.
Right? And quite often what I find with organizations is they're stuck between the two worlds. They really want to move quite quickly, but they have all these old principles and processes in place, and helping them to unlock that and break that is quite difficult. So it's always the cultural piece versus the should we leverage this technology? That's sort of...
okay, so that's now a given. I mean, we've now passed that ship has sailed.
Yep.
Another metaphor, but let's not go with that whole shipping thing because it's now. It gets confusing. So there's an acceptance that this is the world. The question is how to actually move across, and then how best to leverage. And that's presumably why you work with companies like Synthesis.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that how is spot on from Chris's perspective. For many organizations that haven't moved, it's almost at that paralysis by analysis phase, and there's this fear around it, which is, obviously something where between AWS and partners like ourselves, we try and alleviate that fear around it. But I think what I've seen quite interestingly enough is if I go back 2 or 3 years, some of the big drivers to cloud were, look, let's just get into cloud and let's move, right? So there was a very big kind of rehost, like lift and shift kind of mindset. Virtually most of the customers I speak to today are like, there's no question we're moving into cloud, but like we want to leverage cloud and it needs to shift the needle in our business, right? So like we need to optimize, we absolutely need to modernize or refactor, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing that. I mean, I've just been working with a customer recently where, probably 60% of their estate we were looking to kind of lift and shift, and only 40% refactor, and they've come back and gone, no, that's not the plan. Like, it's absolutely not what we do. We're moving 100%. We've got that part right.
Yeah.
But
if we're not leveraging and it's not shifting the needle, we're not moving it. So refactor all the way, right?
And I mean,
different variants of it.
Maybe just to sort of challenge that to a degree, but to also sort of agree with you. Agree. I need to get that right. But I mean, if we think about the reason for organizations wanting to move quite quickly, lift and shift versus refactor, quite often the lift and shift is almost a forcing function to get the organization there, because they don't trust themselves to do it any other way. So many organizations say, we'll do the right thing, we'll refactor, we'll modernize, and we'll try to deliver all the additional capability up front, but then realize that can be really hard and can take time.
Yeah.
And then you see them say, well, if we force ourselves over there, now we're there, we have to get going. So that was the forcing function many organizations.
I hear it. I mean, that's like human behavior. It's recognizing the difficulty of change.
But then there's the discipline after that says, well, now that you've done that, what are you going to do?
With
It's the whole, with great power comes great responsibility. You now have the power of the cloud. Well, guess what? Now you have to be really responsible about how you leverage it for your business as well.
Yeah. Synthesis and AWS, I think, been working together for a very long time, right? Paul, you want to take us through?
10 years, right?
10 years.
Yeah.
First advanced partner in the region as well.
Yeah.
I think that was 2017. So, I mean, good couple of years. First financial services competency partner in the region as well.
Yep. Power. And I mean, I think what we've done really well, without sounding a bit boastful, but I think we've identified where the key kind of areas of where AWS want to be and made sure that we've got strong competencies and got those competencies sorted out, right? So like migrations are still key, DevOps is key, security to your point, Chris, absolutely key. Financial services we see as a big market within South Africa, certainly, and globally it's always proven to be one of the leading things. So these are things that we've got the competencies for. But I think what is interesting about our journey to cloud, if I think about you're getting like maybe three types of organizations from a service provider that move into cloud, right? You're getting the born in the cloud guys. They're waking up today, they're born with a phone in their hand. The only thing they know is this kind of world.
Yeah, it's like my generation are that. We were born into
100%, right? Yeah. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So you know that story really well, which is fantastic. You get the traditional kind of infrastructure player who literally their business, without sounding crude, like fell off a cliff, right? Suddenly this cloud evolution's happened. People aren't buying servers and big data centers anymore, and they suddenly realized they had to get into this. And the guys that even were before that were starting to recognize the need for cloud, and it was an extension of their data center or their private cloud. And so they've got in there from an infrastructure perspective and play a very valuable part of the ecosystem. And then there are a few players that are slightly different, right? And I think that's where Synthesis came in. And they're the service provider that came in from a software development perspective, right? So they don't come in from an infrastructure play. Yep. And the interesting part of that is the story behind Synthesis, which I've always found fascinating, right? Because I haven't been at Synthesis since the beginning. But was that the recognition at Synthesis that we were doing a lot of software dev, and to really leverage what we were building and extend it, we needed a different way of doing it. And putting it down on a server just wasn't working. And so there was this idea of cloud, and at the time it was Microsoft and Amazon, right? Yeah. And so we started deploying our code on cloud. We chose Amazon, obviously, because it's, for us, it was definitely more flexible. I often use the analogy of the Apple versus like the Android, right? If you're a dev guy, you're going to probably pick an Android phone. If you're me, you're probably going to pick the Apple. For Synthesis as a software dev house, Amazon was the Android, right? It gave us the flexibility to do what we needed to do. And in that journey, 2 years later, we recognized, hang on a second, the value that we get from this, our customers can get from this, and then started the partnership with AWS, formally, 8-9 years ago. And it's been a fantastic journey ever since.
It sounds like you almost went through a similar journey to what Amazon did in terms of how we landed on AWS. If you think about, you're talking about solving for yourself and then going down the routes. AWS started by trying to solve a really challenging problem for Amazon around ability to scale and support customers, right? Which was an idea.
I didn't realize that. Which is so interesting.
Yeah, which was born into scalable utility computing. It was a bunch of South African guys who then said, well, we're happy to build it, but we're coming back to South Africa. And then, Cape Town became the home of EC2, S3, and some other services. But we solved for ourselves and then went, hang on a second, this could be really cool for a whole bunch of other organizations.
And then changed the world.
Yeah, and then we always say, we quite often don't know what our customers are going to build unless they really tell us. I think about a local retailer who released something a few years ago that was incredibly disruptive to the retail market. We'd helped them build this for a couple of months. Didn't know what we were building until it got launched. They said, oh, by the way, you've helped us build the following. And that was quite an interesting approach from their side. But again, trying to disrupt the industry, we were still building quite a bit of trust in them. But it was the same with ourselves, that we
love that, actually.
We looked out
so cool.
and we didn't think we'd help to sort of develop the Netflix of the world or the Airbnbs of the world or help to scale the booking.coms. Never mind all the things we're doing locally. Time Bank, first South African digital bank to be profitable, right?
Yeah.
Now going
Great
global.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. We are out of time. But before we end, I want to, Chris, what is the next most exciting thing for the next 6 months, a year? What do you see as really, really awesome and cool?
You mean besides coming to our summit on the 29th of
August?
Besides
that.
That's the big thing for us.
We'll be there.
I think from my perspective it's watching this sort of evolution of generative AI and actually starting to see the real material use cases locally that's going to start to pop up, right? We're working with a number of organizations across every imaginable industry. And some of the ideas that our customers have come up with are incredible, right? So to watch that play out and land up in the consumer's hands for me is going to be really interesting. And then seeing how much of an additional interest we're taking up in the startup market globally, because we believe if we can help those startups in the space, that can ultimately disrupt industries, right? And that for me is going to be fascinating.
Well, you mentioned a whole lot of them. In just a few minutes ago, you mentioned all of these startups. So you never know. And in fact, any business can find out and use technology and be able to predict what's going to happen in 4 laps' time. So I think that is absolutely awesome. See what I did there? Circled back. And that is where we leave it. I'm Howard Feldman. I've been in conversation with Paul from Synthesis, Chris Erasmus from AWS, just talking about really cool things. This is Synthesis TV. Leave us a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you do want to know anything, ask us and we'll come back to you.